Charles, are you done moving yet? My father-in-law grumbles, not bothering to look at me but clearly directing his question at me. He always talks like he's the only one that matters. I've put up with it until now, but I can't anymore. I stop wiping the table and give Charles a hard stare, even though he's not looking at me. I'll be out today, I reply. Charles smirks, satisfied. You've just been a leech in garbage. I'll feel so much better when you're gone. He probably thinks, oblivious to how much his lifestyle has changed. My name's Grace. I turned 40 this year. I'm married to William and currently staying with my in-laws. It's been a few years since we got married, but we don't have kids. We don't plan on having any, and we can anyway. I found out shortly after we got married. I met William at a party, and honestly, if I'd known about his infertility from the beginning, I might not have married him. He told me on our wedding day. It felt like my world crashed down on me. We had dreams of a bright future together, imagining ourselves with perhaps 2 kids and discussing potential names for them. William even joined in on picking out names for our future children. But it was all a deception, or maybe not entirely a deception. Maybe William did desire children and thought about names, despite knowing he couldn't have them. Wasn't that the ultimate betrayal? I married him with the belief that we would create a happy family together, only to be completely deceived by William, whom I trusted implicitly. While some might have immediately filed for divorce upon discovering such a truth, divorce isn't a straightforward option for me. I had already committed to building a family with my in-laws, who are the only ones we can truly call parents. I couldn't just announce to them the day after becoming a family that we were getting divorced. Living with the in-laws meant facing the inevitable question of when we would start a family. So we decided to break the news to them right away. Naturally, we didn't blame William. Instead, we attributed our childlessness to a medical issue on my end. When they found out we couldn't have children, my in-laws were livid. A worthless woman who can't bear children should leave this house immediately, declared my father-in-law Charles, who then began treating me like a servant. From the moment I arrived, I was never treated with respect, always made to feel inferior. I ate alone in the kitchen, cleaning up after the in-laws and William finished their meals. Despite my efforts in the kitchen, I only received scraps. My weight plummeted, and within 6 months of marriage, my wrists were protruding. Previously, it was my mother-in-law Madison who bore the brunt of Charles' anger. But once I joined the family, his focus shifted to me. William noticed Madison's newfound relief. "Mom seems happier lately," he remarked, attributing it to her no longer being the target. Although she never smiled around Charles, I noticed her smiling more when talking to William. Charles's tyranny extended beyond verbal abuse. Once he learned we couldn't have children, he ordered me to work tirelessly from dawn to dusk. "Since you're not fulfilling your role as a woman, at least be useful around the house," he demanded. I had always intended to work after marriage and was eager to leave the house as soon as possible. Balancing chores, work, and arriving home before everyone else was challenging, but having a job with flexible hours helped. However, even when I returned early and completed chores, I never ate with the family or received praise for my cooking. Charles, in particular, often discarded my food without tasting it, deeming it unworthy. Neither William nor Madison ever objected or offered any support. Despite my protests from the kitchen, meal times were usually silent affairs. I couldn't help but wonder if they truly enjoyed eating in such silence. But I can only observe them silently. I had no other option but to get along with my in-laws. I pretended to be friendly and played the role of a devoted wife. I couldn't pinpoint the purpose of it all, but as someone without parents, divorce seemed like an unbearable burden. Then Charles demanded that I hand over all my earnings for the household expenses. I had intended to contribute a portion of my salary, but Charles insisted on all of it, which seemed like an unreasonable demand. What's the point of working if I have no control over my own money? But speaking up was not allowed. Charles's decisions were final, and challenging him wouldn't change anything. It was easier to comply, keeping Charles in a good mood and avoiding the sorrowful looks from Madison and William. Ultimately, The main source of trouble in this marriage was Charles. Madison and William were not as much of a problem. It was Charles who oppressed and tormented me. It appeared that Madison used to handle the household finances, but it became my responsibility after marriage. Charles, isn't this too much for Grace? Madison dared to question. Shut up, Charles dismissed me in his eyes. Madison and I were treated similarly. As women, our opinions were deemed worthless and not welcomed. I took over the household budget from Madison. When I first saw it, I was shocked, but after several years, I grew accustomed to it. Perhaps because there was another source of income, Charles started spending more extravagantly than before. It's for work, he claimed, increasing his nights out. And the three of them, excluding me, began taking trips during long weekends. They never used to act like this, but suddenly everything changed. He still doesn't see me as part of the family, often referring to me as a burden or worthless. To him, I'm just a maid who doesn't cost anything. In my 20s and 30s, I could brush it off, sometimes even finding peace when Charles wasn't around. But as I neared 40, I couldn't stand his mistreatment any longer. It felt foolish and exhausting to listen to him and obey silently. I grew tired of being afraid of Charles and started standing up for myself. He didn't take kindly to that and gradually grew to resent me. This negative cycle continued to worsen, and recently, my relationship with Charles had deteriorated to the point where we hardly spoke. When he did speak, it was only to insult me. I would fire back, making the atmosphere at home unbearable. It had gotten so bad that he would demand I leave the house. But I refused to go quietly. Where do you expect me to go, knowing I have no family? I would retort every time. Charles would angrily slam his glass on the table, breaking so many that I lost count. Why should I have to deal with this? A woman like you shouldn't talk back. Madison and William would quickly exit the room, sensing another argument brewing. Once it reached this point, it became Charles' one-man show. You should be grateful to even be allowed in this house. Don't get too cocky, you leech, he would rant, his face turning red with anger. We've had this conversation 100 times, I sighed, tired of being yelled at. Normally, I would cave in and apologize. I'm sorry was my usual response, but that day was different. You need to watch what you say, Charles. You're not getting any younger. It's time to calm down. I snapped back sharply, feeling just as irritable. Charles, caught off guard by my defiance, was furious. Who do you think you're talking to? I am the head of this household. A wife like you shouldn't have opinions, he barked. I knew I had crossed a line, but I couldn't stop myself. I've been your wife for years. Isn't it time I'm treated like a human being? You're retired now with less income. It seems the tables are turning. I continued, unable to contain my pent-up frustration. I confronted Charles directly, and he responded by grabbing me by the collar. I don't need someone like you in my house. I don't want to see your face anymore. Pack your things and leave immediately. He yelled so loudly that the furniture shook. Though I should have apologized right then, I couldn't hold back any longer. Fine, you want me to leave? That's what will make you happy, isn't it, Charles? I challenged him, meeting his gaze defiantly. Yes, he spat out. Unable to remain silent any longer, I declared, then I'll do it. He stormed off to his room with a loud noise, and I, feeling somewhat calmer, began cleaning the living room, which Charles had left in disarray. Madison came to check on me with a worried expression, but left without saying anything, returning to her own room. I realized I had no place in this house anymore. Neither William nor Madison would stand up for me. Years of enduring mistreatment had finally erupted, leaving me feeling more isolated than ever. The next morning, I followed my usual routine, waking up early to start my day. Charles emerged from his room and entered the living room, settling onto the sofa with a newspaper, paying me no mind. Without even glancing up, he casually asked, "Have you finished moving yet?" It was impossible for me to have relocated so swiftly after the events of yesterday. I assumed it was merely a drunken outburst, not a serious demand. Surely he was referring to leaving the house, right? When do you plan on departing? You no longer have the right to reside here. Charles continued, still not meeting my gaze. Halting my task, I turned to face him directly. If he truly intends for me to leave, then I must respond seriously. I'll be gone by today, I declared firmly. Nearby, Madison, frozen with concern, cast a worried glance in my direction. It was evident that once I departed, Charles would refocus his animosity towards her, and she didn't want me to leave. However, Charles had made up his mind. Apologizing and staying was never an option. With a satisfied laugh from Charles echoing behind me, I hurriedly gathered my belongings and left the in-laws' home. Uncertain of my destination, I felt a sense of liberation. I sent a message to William, who was already away. Please proceed with the divorce proceedings. A lawyer would reach out to him. With that, I powered off my phone. In the following days, I engaged a lawyer who reached out to William and the in-laws. Charles, convinced that divorce was inevitable, pressured William to swiftly sign the papers. William hesitated, glancing back and forth between me and the divorce documents. But there was no room for second thoughts. With Charles's insistence and my determination to move forward, he reluctantly complied. I have no money to spare for a woman like you, but dealing with lawyers is a nuisance, so I'll foot the bill, Charles grumbled, his arrogance palpable. The lawyer offered a wry smile at his demeanor. Despite his reluctance, William signed the agreement under Charles's stern gaze. In the presence of the lawyer, I added my signature, and the divorce was finalized. We settled the distribution of assets, and I received compensation for the harassment I had documented. It proved wise to invest in legal support rather than navigate the process alone. Concerned about his reputation, Charles opted to avoid complications by involving lawyers. As the manager of household finances, I was privy to Charles's financial situation, allowing me to propose a settlement within his means. With the property division and harassment compensation settled, I embarked on a comfortable life in my own apartment. While solitude was once daunting, my time living with the in-laws and going through a divorce taught me to appreciate the tranquility of my own space. I relished preparing meals for myself, reveling in the peace of not having anyone to answer to. One day, roughly 3 months post-divorce, Charles's incessant calls flood my phone. Assuming it's nothing positive, I ignore them, but his persistence forces me to accidentally answer. What have you done to my house? His voice reverberates loudly, even without the speaker mode. Instinctively, I pull the phone away from my ear. I haven't done anything. I simply left the house, as you've instructed. I reply defensively. Unsatisfied with my response, Charles continues to berate me. How can you claim you've done nothing? I'm receiving notifications about withdrawal issues since you left. Ah, so he's upset about the withdrawal problems and blames me. I don't know. I didn't take any action. I managed everything according to your directives and paid all dues. I respond, a sense of satisfaction creeping in as I understand why Charles is upset. I suppress a grin, relieved he can't see my reaction. That's absurd. Before you arrived, we managed fine with mine, Madison's, and William's incomes. How much were you earning anyway? I recall that I never disclosed my salary details to Charles. $45,000 take home. I reveal. Charles emits a noise akin to a squashed frog before falling silent. In reality, my job in sales at an investment trust firm primarily consisted of commission-based earnings, contingent on the returns I generated for investors. However, much of it vanished due to Charles' extravagant spending. Nonetheless, I had wisely invested my inheritance, generating some additional income. It wasn't a substantial amount, but it helped cover living expenses. I relied on this income to purchase necessities, although during the property distribution, only William's savings were considered. This was because only assets acquired during our marriage were subject to distribution, excluding the inheritance from my parents and its earnings. Since I utilized all earnings for household expenses throughout the marriage, I had no savings accumulated over the years. The Charles family spent money lavishly, unaware that I was compensating for it. You claim you managed before marriage, but was it on par with our current standard of living? I questioned. Charles's frustration finally boiled over. Don't jest. You should continue contributing to our household expenses. You're the one who caused this mess, so you must take responsibility, he retorted angrily. I couldn't help but chuckle at his absurd statement. I could envision Charles's face reddening as he raised his voice. What's the matter? What are you implying? You were the one who insisted I leave, remember? I simply followed your directive. Why should I, no longer a part of the family, continue providing financial support? I replied, half amused, before hearing a loud crash from the other end. Charles must have thrown another fit. The realization that I no longer had to clean up after him almost made me wish for more destruction. Moreover, we're strangers now, not family, not anything. Please refrain from assuming familial obligations. Manage your own finances. I left you with enough to sustain yourself, didn't I? With that, I bid him farewell and disconnected the call. I anticipated more calls from Charles, but none came. I thought perhaps he was feeling remorseful, but it seemed that wasn't the case. Instead, it appeared he was too ashamed to admit he couldn't meet the payments. He resorted to pressuring William and Madison to borrow money from financial institutions to cover their expenses. While payments were made, it only led to accumulating debt. Refusing to adjust their lifestyle, they continued living beyond their means. Continuing like this will only lead to more debt. You need to make changes, I warned, but they persisted, unable to meet their financial obligations and sinking further into debt each month. William reached out to me, foolishly considering reconciliation and even suggesting severing ties with his father to reunite. How could he propose such a thing now, after failing to defend me against Charles's mistreatment? Despite my decision to stand by William, knowing we couldn't have children, he never protected me. His suffocation under Charles' influence is no longer my concern. I wish they would grasp the consequences of their actions and endure the repercussions. Now, the in-laws find themselves burdened by debt yet unwilling to adjust their lifestyle. Charles, now working as a contract laborer with reduced pay, and William and Madison have taken up part-time security positions. It's not just Charles. Madison and William are also guilty of refusing to downsize their living standards. Despite being stretched to their limit, they refuse to make sacrifices. I used to be consumed with protecting William, but now I prioritize my own well-being. At 40, the prospect of having children may be challenging, but I remain open to the possibility. Before the divorce, mornings felt like a burden, but now I wake up feeling rejuvenated. I eagerly anticipate a brighter future in my newfound independence.
Look at that guy over there. He seems pretty unsettling. I overheard the female employees whispering, and I instinctively took a step back. I'm Jason, and today I'm set to meet the female CEO of a rival company. How dare he visit our CEO? Every step I took across that office was accompanied by the cold murmurs of the female staff, leaving me wondering if I'd made a mistake. But if I hadn't intervened, who knows what could have happened to our CEO? People can complain all they want. I haven't done anything wrong. Repeating this to myself, I found myself standing outside the CEO's office. It all began a few weeks ago when our company and Red Rose Incorporated, a competitor, decided to collaborate on a product. My company specializes in designing and selling men's shoes. Although we have a women's shoe design department, we're significantly behind Red Rose in terms of quality and popularity. That's why they approached us for a collaboration. The idea for the joint product came directly from the CEO of Red Rose Incorporated. The CEO of Red Rose Incorporated, a renowned fashion brand, had shown a keen interest in one of my shoe designs. She specifically requested a pair of high heels for their collection, presenting a new challenge for me since my previous work had focused solely on men's footwear. I found myself questioning whether I had the expertise to design high heels that would meet and exceed the sophisticated tastes of women. Driven by the opportunity, I decided to visit the striking Red Rose headquarters. The building was a vision of elegance with its expansive glass walls, gleaming white marble floors, and an ambience that felt almost cinematic. As I arrived on the ground floor, a team of strikingly beautiful receptionists greeted me, each exuding an air of refinement and professionalism. "Hello, and welcome to Red Rose Incorporated. How may I assist you?" asked one of them with a friendly tone. After I introduced myself as Jason, she responded with a warm smile. "Ah, Jason, we've been expecting you. Please follow me." I could hear the distinct click of her high heels on the marble as she led the way. Surrounded by a sea of stylishly dressed women, all moving with an effortless grace and confidence, I remarked, "It seems like there are more women than men here. Does it seem like the most comfortable place for guys, does it?" I attempted to make conversation. The receptionist merely nodded in response. I chuckled nervously, speculating that perhaps this was part of the secret behind their success in women's fashion. "I've heard that Red Rose Incorporated is predominantly staffed by women." "Yes, our goal is to create an environment where women feel most at ease," she said with a bright smile. "I absolutely love working here." Upon reaching the CEO's office on the top floor, I was struck by the stunning display of women's footwear at the center of the room. A woman was admiring a pair of shoes on display. "That's the CEO, Mrs. Mary Johnson. Nice to meet you," the receptionist said. "Oh, you're already here," Mrs. Johnson said with a look of pleasant surprise as I introduced myself. She then flashed a warm, endearing smile that made my heart skip a beat. "Please have a seat. I'll prepare some tea for us." "Thank you," I replied, taking a seat on the couch as directed. Mrs. Johnson soon returned with a tray bearing an elegant tea set. The aroma of the tea was captivating, and even with my limited knowledge, I could tell this was something special. "Here you go. It's minty. I hope you enjoy it," she said with a gentle smile. Her grace and elegance were evident, and as I marveled at her gesture, she presented a sketchbook with a detailed drawing of my shoe design. Intrigued, I asked, "What's this?" Mrs. Johnson explained that she had been sketching my shoes as part of her research, noting their simple yet comfortable design that could complement any outfit. "They might not be flashy, but they're versatile, and that's exactly what we're looking for, shoes that look good on everyone, regardless of their style," she said, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. Encouraged, I may have said something slightly awkward, but she responded by taking my hand firmly. "Please design shoes for our company. They don't have to be extravagant, just ones that look good on anyone," she said with genuine excitement. "It's an honor to collaborate with such a talented designer." I was flattered but couldn't shake off my concerns. "Your brand is highly esteemed among women for its footwear. I'm sure you have many skilled designers who understand the needs and desires of your female customers." "We do have a wealth of talented designers," she replied, "but their vision doesn't align with our current direction. They tend to cater to a specific group of people." "A specific group?" I asked, curious. "They believe that only certain women should enjoy fashion. There was a time when I, too, focused on beauty above all else. But that's not enough. Every woman deserves to feel stylish and confident," she explained. I recalled the fashionable women I had seen on my way to her office and I found myself nodding in agreement. When I suggested creating shoes that would fit and flatter any woman, I had been met with resistance, the dismissive response being that those who didn't put in the effort to look their best were to blame. "That's a rather harsh stance," I said, feeling a pang of sympathy for the CEO's predicament. Making such a statement, regardless of one's appearance, can be quite off-putting. "So what made you choose me?" I asked. "Your shoes are wonderful. They have a charm and versatility that we've been lacking, shoes that any woman can wear and feel stylish in. That passion of mine, which I had almost lost, has been rekindled," she said with a radiant smile. Seeing the CEO's captivating grin, who wouldn't be invigorated by such praise? "Very well, let's work together to create the finest shoes." I agreed enthusiastically, and she beamed in response. Little did we know that a major upheaval was just around the corner. A few days later, I visited Red Rose for another meeting with Mary. "It's me, Jason." Upon arriving at her office and knocking on the door, I felt an unsettling silence. Normally, Mary would greet me with enthusiasm, but there was no response. "Excuse me, I'm coming in," I said, feeling a growing sense of unease. I entered her office and found Mary lying motionless on the floor. "Mary." I rushed to her side, but she remained still. Desperately, I placed my ear to her chest, but there was no heartbeat. My heart raced, and I felt the blood drain from my face as my hands began to tremble. Remembering the AED training for my certification course, I immediately contacted the secretary's desk. "Mary's collapsed. Please call an ambulance right now, and if there's an AED, bring it. I instructed the secretary urgently and began performing CPR on Mary, but her heart didn't respond. Damn it, is it too late? Sorry, I've brought it, the secretary said as she arrived with the AED. Thank you. Mary, I'm so sorry, I said as I hurriedly lifted her clothing to attach the AED. The secretary nearby gasped and covered her face with her hands, blushing deeply, but I couldn't afford to be distracted by that. I quickly attached the AED pads to Mary's chest and activated it. Her body jolted with a loud zap, but there was no immediate change. Panicking, I followed the AED's voice instructions and administered another shock. After a second jolt, Mary began breathing with difficulty. Mary, are you okay? Please don't move. After confirming her breathing, I gently covered her with my coat. Just as I was about to ask the anxious secretary if the ambulance was on its way, I heard sirens approaching. Can you show the paramedics in when they arrive? Yes, she said, rushing out to guide them. Later, Mary was transported to the state hospital. She later contacted me to inform me that she had a pre-existing heart condition and had collapsed after a seizure. Thanks to the quick response, she was expected to recover fully and be discharged soon without any lingering effects. I breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing that. However, the next day, as I arrived at the office, I was met by the manager, who had a displeased look on his face. Jason, what on earth did you do? He demanded. I was summoned first thing in the morning and berated, but I was completely bewildered. I haven't done anything, I protested. There was a request from Red Rose to cancel the current collaboration project. Is it because Mary collapsed? I asked, concerned. No, he said sternly. They say it's because you did something inappropriate to Mary. Inappropriate? I was taken aback, thinking back to the events of the previous day. I had indeed lifted Mary's shirt to use the AED, but it was done solely to save her life, not with any ulterior motive. So, I hear you lifted Mary's shirt to use the AED, the manager said. They're suggesting you might have done that for other reasons. That's absurd, I protested. Anyway, Mary needs to rest now. Reflect deeply on this and stay away from Red Rose. Frustration boiled within me, and I clenched my jaw. Mary and I had spent weeks refining the design together. The thought that all our efforts might be wasted was infuriating. Please, I'll do anything to prevent the cancellation of this collaboration. Can't you help me convince them to reconsider? I bowed my head, hoping to clear up the misunderstanding, but the manager let out a deep sigh. What are you talking about? Even if the AED incident hadn't occurred, the collaboration couldn't continue after Mary's collapse. This project requires her personal oversight, but Mary's vision is already integrated into the project. If I take the lead, understanding her intentions and the purpose of the collaboration, I can see it through. I remember how pleased she was with my design drawings. I'm sure she'd be devastated if the project falls through. I can't let that happen. Even so, it's a request from them. There's nothing I can do, the manager said, his tone final. This can't be, I protested, but he turned his back on me, signaling the end of our discussion. Just then, his cell phone rang. Who could that be at this time? Is it Mary? He muttered, standing up with a start and answering the call in a flustered manner. Yes, so the project will continue, correct? Understood. I paced nervously, overhearing the conversation and seeing the manager nodding vigorously. When he hung up, he turned to me with a broad smile. The project is going ahead, he said, his demeanor now markedly more positive. It seems Mary has managed to smooth things over from the hospital. She's determined to see this collaboration through, and she's confident that you can handle it. It seemed there had been a misunderstanding. Mary had just called to confirm that the collaboration would indeed continue. I was so relieved by the manager's words that I nearly collapsed from the tension and had to sit down right there. But I was still anxious. Was Mary truly okay? And how did this mix-up happen? The anxiety was palpable. Looks like we'll be resuming our meetings tomorrow. Can you make it to Red Rose? The manager asked. Yes, I replied, though I still felt a twinge of unease. I was thrilled that the project was back on track. The next day, I arrived at the CEO's office as usual. I'm glad you could make it. I'm really sorry for the trouble I've caused. I had no idea my chronic condition would flare up like that, Mary said, visibly relieved to see me. I entered the CEO's office, where Mary immediately began apologizing, though I felt it should have been me apologizing for the distress my actions might have caused. I'm deeply sorry about the incident. I said, acknowledging the impact it must have had on her. Some of her employees were clearly unsettled by the situation. Mary's response caught me off guard. She seemed more angry than relieved. Upset because you saved me, she snapped, before abruptly leaving to gather everyone in the hall. Her usually composed demeanor was nowhere to be seen. I'll be back shortly, she said, leaving with a look of regret. Months passed, and we successfully completed our goal. The prototype for the high heels was ready. Mary's eyes lit up as she admired the shoes in a captivating wine hue. They're simply stunning. I've always dreamed of owning something like this, she said with a wistful sigh. Mary's passion for footwear was well known. That day, she promptly called an urgent staff meeting to clear up the misunderstanding about the AD incident. She made it clear that I had acted solely to help her without any ill intent. To my relief, several employees later approached me to apologize, and the confusion seemed to be resolved. They were probably just envious of your talent, a colleague suggested. Do you really think so? I wondered if my work was indeed good enough to inspire envy. Mary thought for a moment and then said, I can't say for sure, but what I do know is that shoes should be designed with the wearer's needs in mind. Perhaps they just don't understand that fundamental principle. I then offered, would you like to try on the prototype? It seems like it might be the perfect size for you. Mary's face brightened at the suggestion. She slipped off her black heels and stepped into the wine-red high heels on display. Wow, these are much more comfortable than they look, she exclaimed as she walked around the room. Seeing her move gracefully in the high heels filled me with satisfaction. This project, which had faced so many hurdles, was finally coming to fruition. I was thrilled to see her joyful expression and hoped to see it more often in the future. My name is Michael, and I'm 38 years old. I've been working as a programmer at my current company for many years. I've always loved this job. Programming brings me daily satisfaction. Though there were challenges at first, I've grown more confident over time, turning my early anxieties into a strong sense of competence. I've come to believe in the value of dedication and persistence, a lesson I often share with the younger colleagues. For now, I'm content where I am. Maybe opportunities for advancement will arise, or perhaps a new job offer might come my way. But at 38, I can't help but feel that this company is where I'll stay. The thought of further career growth seems distant, almost unattainable. That's what I was thinking when everything changed. A new department head joined our company, a woman named Mila. She's 37, and I admired her for reaching such a high position at a young age. From the moment I first saw her, she exuded confidence and competence. However, her demeanor was icy and distant. The first words she ever spoke to me were, "Did you only graduate from middle school? You're not very bright, are you?" I realized she must have seen that on my resume, but how far back did she really need to look? Unfortunately, her harassment didn't end there. Middle school grads are a burden to this company. You should just disappear, she continued. Even though I tried to apologize, Mila showed no mercy. The harassment intensified each day until I was eventually stripped of my duties. You're not suited for main office work, she declared, dismissing the very job I had been doing successfully for years. Mila wasn't interested in listening. Was it really because I only graduated from middle school? Up until now, I never gave it much thought. My education was in the past, and in today's world, people rarely care about where you went to school. It's simply not a relevant topic. A week after being barred from work, Mila summoned me to her office. How does it feel to be unable to work? She asked, her tone dripping with condescension. I felt like a shell of my former self. Did Mila know how much my work meant to me? If she was intentionally taking that away, it was the cruelest thing she could do. She continued, given your lack of education and incompetence, you're no longer needed at headquarters. You can either be fired or accept a demotion to a remote location. Without hesitation, I replied, then fire me. In that moment, everything became clear. Mila's goal was to drive me out of the company. She had taken my work away, creating a hostile environment to force me to leave. Reflecting on her actions, I realized she had been particularly harsh on other employees who, like me, were also middle school graduates. We were constantly reminded of our supposed incompetence, made to feel unwelcome at headquarters. How much distress must everyone have been enduring? I wasn't the only victim. Since Mila's arrival, the company's atmosphere had noticeably shifted from a friendly, collaborative environment to one that suddenly prioritized educational background above all else. I remembered when Mila once asked me, "Why are there so many middle school grads here?" I had never paid attention to people's educational backgrounds. It simply didn't matter to me. When she asked, all I could offer was a vague response, which only earned me her scorn. "Of course, you wouldn't know. You're incompetent," she sneered. "I'm sorry," I muttered, feeling humiliated. Who did Mila think she was? Could she have spoken that way to anyone else if she herself were less educated? Besides, I was no longer allowed to work here anyway. If I couldn't do the job that gave my life meaning, there was no reason to stay. Even if I accepted a demotion to a remote location, Mila would still be my boss. There was no way I could continue working under someone like her. "Thank you for everything. You don't have to come back ever again." That was the line I felt like delivering, and I meant it. I never wanted to work with someone like Mila again, let alone follow her orders. Despite her position, Mila was younger, lacked basic decency, and there was nothing about her I could respect. That day, I completed the handover documents and left the company for good. Since Mila's harassment began, I had seriously considered changing jobs. With my years of experience at the company, I felt confident I could find a new position elsewhere. I had even started exploring opportunities discreetly. After leaving the company, I had a few errands to run and quickly made my way home. Once I finished my tasks, a profound sense of relief washed over me, as if I had finally escaped that toxic environment. The next day, however, I received an unexpected call from Mila. The thought of her reaching out made me angry, but I saw it as an opportunity to voice my thoughts one last time. I decided to approach the situation with a positive mindset. When I arrived at the company, Mila looked unusually grim. I was curious but didn't want to intrude. "What's going on?" I asked as Mila presented the handover documents I had prepared the day before. Her face was ashen. Despite her appearance, I felt no sympathy. "Is there a problem with the documents?" I asked, keeping my tone even. Mila replied, "Do you understand the implications of all this?" "Of course I do. I created these documents, so I understand every detail," I said confidently. The documents detailed the programming work I had developed. While they were technical, they shouldn't have been too challenging. Yet Mila seemed to struggle with them, repeatedly glancing at the pages with a look of confusion. "Is something wrong?" I asked. Mila, "What's wrong? I don't understand any of this. What are these documents?" She flung the papers at me in frustration. I was taken aback by her disregard for something I had worked on so diligently, but Mila's anger only seemed to grow. "You did this on purpose to make it incomprehensible for me, didn't you?" she accused. It was astonishing. Anyone with a background in programming should have been able to understand these documents. I had assumed that Mila, with her superior attitude, would be knowledgeable, but it seemed she was completely unfamiliar with the content. I began to feel a surge of anger again. I had finally escaped Mila's clutches and was ready to start fresh, but here she was dragging me back into her chaos. "If you don't understand, you should have mentioned it earlier," I blurted out, my frustration evident. It wasn't my fault if she was too proud to admit her lack of knowledge. Mila's behavior was a prime example of someone who was too self-important. As a department head, she should have known better. If something was unclear, she needed to ask for help, not let her arrogance stand in the way. Yet instead of seeking help from others in the company, she chose to call me, someone who had already left. Her pride seemed insurmountable, and that was hardly a compliment. Mila's next words confirmed my suspicions. "Your way of speaking sounds so sarcastic. It had to be you, no one else," she said. The fact that she was relying on me in this manner was hardly gratifying. If she needed assistance, she should have asked directly rather than summoning me after I had already departed. "Why did it have to be me?" I asked calmly, though I was eager to end this conversation. I wished she would get to the point without all the pretense. Mila's desperation was evident as she revealed. All the employees said they didn't understand the meaning of these documents. It wasn't just Mila who struggled. The rest of the staff was also at a loss. I was taken aback by the revelation that no one else could handle the work I had been doing. Mila's disregard for her employees became glaringly evident. She had always dismissed their efforts, valuing only educational credentials over actual contributions. It seemed she had never paid attention to who was performing what tasks, whether as a department head or otherwise. My frustration flared. "So you brought me back to the company because I'm the only one who can make sense of this?" Mila pounded the desk in frustration, though her anger was misdirected. This situation was the result of her own negligence. Programming can be mastered by adults who are willing to learn, though some aspects do require years of experience. The basics, however, should be comprehensible to anyone with some effort. Mila's failure to educate herself and her reliance on me were astonishing. She had always looked down on others, but when push came to shove, she clung to those she had previously dismissed. Without my expertise, the company's programming efforts would be paralyzed. I began to question whether Mila even understood my role within the company. Her self-centered focus suggested she was unaware of what I actually did, which likely led her to dismiss my contributions and use my educational background as an excuse to strip me of my responsibilities. The company must have faced considerable disruption during my absence, but Mila, oblivious to the significance of my work, probably hadn't noticed the impact. I decided to confront her directly. "Did you know what my role was in the company?" Mila shook her head immediately, confirming my suspicions. Mila's defiance was infuriating. Her blatant disregard for my role, simply because of my educational background, was maddening. But since I was no longer tied to the company, I had decided that revealing the truth might be a fitting final act. The realization of how stunned Mila would be began to amuse me. I figured I wouldn't be leaving the company premises anytime soon and took a perverse pleasure in the idea of hitting back at her. I was, after all, responsible for all the company's programming, an irrefutable fact. With years of experience, I managed complex programming tasks that were crucial to the company's operations. My peers trusted me, and my work was both fulfilling and indispensable. Mila's actions had shattered that. If I was no longer needed, I was ready to step away without regrets. It was clear that if I was to be in a place where my skills were appreciated, it was no longer here. I had accepted that reality. Mila's reaction confirmed her ignorance. "No way, you." Her astonishment was palpable and caught me off guard. It was clear she had been utterly oblivious to the critical nature of my work. The company had relied heavily on my expertise, and her realization now was a testament to her lack of awareness. "Yes, and it's no wonder things fell apart after I left," I said, my frustration evident. "It's infuriating to see how poorly things have gone since you took over. If you had been more attentive to what was actually happening, perhaps none of this would have occurred." Mila's tendency to shift blame had never been more evident. The situation would likely have been avoided if she hadn't become department head in the first place. "So, you didn't realize how crucial my work was to the company," I pressed, cornering her with my words. Mila snapped back, "You never mentioned it. And no one else knew either." Her reaction made me question her grasp on reality. It seemed she was struggling to admit her mistakes, especially since her tenure as department head had led to significant financial losses for the company. Determined to understand the full extent of the damage, I asked about employees who had some programming knowledge. Mila's response was shocking. "I thought they were all incompetent dropouts, so I fired them all." I was outraged. The sheer recklessness of her decision was staggering, and I couldn't hold back my frustration. Since she was no longer my boss, I felt free to express my anger. I had years of experience, and I wasn't going to be lectured by someone who clearly had no understanding of the work I did. "Why are you shouting all of a sudden? You're just one of my underperforming subordinates," Mila retorted, questioning my demeanor. But her criticism no longer intimidated me. I was determined to call out the incompetence of a department head who had caused so much damage. Mila needed to confront her own failures and understand that she was wholly unsuitable for the role. Mila's resistance was stronger than I had anticipated. "You've been looking down on me this whole time, haven't you? You did this on purpose because I wasn't aware of your work, didn't you?" I shook my head. Engaging with someone like Mila was futile. I had done my best to handle everything at work, and it was her responsibility to understand the implications of her decisions. However, Mila didn't give me a chance to counter her accusations. "Your silence confirms it. Ha! You're just trying to blame everything on me," she exclaimed, doubling down on her defense. It wasn't that I was choosing to remain silent. Mila had launched into a monologue, completely shutting out anyone else. Her unrelenting tirade made it impossible for anyone to interject. It was likely the reason why the employees she dismissed couldn't stand up to her and ultimately left. As someone who had also been dismissed, I felt a deep sense of sympathy. While I sighed in frustration, Mila continued her tirade with even more hostility. "You think you're so important, but you're mistaken," she said with scorn. "Isn't she the one who's mistaken? I've never considered myself important, and perhaps that's a more humble perspective than hers." I finally had a chance to respond. but it seemed my words were falling on deaf ears. Isn't it true that the whole mess started because you never bothered to ask about the job? And now I'm the one suffering. Mila always seems to blame others. If you had explained the job from the start, I wouldn't have had to fire you, she continued. I was stunned by her audacity. After all the belittling I'd endured, now she was shifting the blame onto me. The company's loss is also my loss, and it all happened after I became department head, Mila said with a resigned sigh. It was clear she only considered how the situation impacted her. I felt foolish for ever hoping Mila might appreciate the value of my work. If it had been advantageous to her, she would have simply dismissed me and moved on. Life never seems to follow a straightforward path, and her being department head at this time was just my bad luck. Now Mila began to wallow in her misfortune. Because I became department head, I had to deal with a middle school graduate. This has really taken a toll on my mental health. How are you going to take responsibility for this? She screamed, her anger making her appear almost monstrous. Being yelled at unexpectedly was jarring, but I couldn't hold back my retort. Even though it seemed like the worst possible moment to antagonize her, my frustration boiled over. What do you know? Do you have any idea? I started, unable to keep my anger in check. Reflecting on my time as department head, it was evident that Mila was quite pleased with her power. Her subordinates obeyed her without question, and those she targeted for dismissal were completely at her mercy. The company seemed to operate under her dictatorship. However, the moment things began to deteriorate, she shifted her dissatisfaction onto everyone else. And then, out of nowhere, Mila made a ludicrous proposal. You should just come back to the company. Everything will be fine then. What? After all the bullying and harm she caused, now she expects me to return. Who would agree to such an absurd suggestion? For the first time in a long while, I found myself shouting from the depths of my frustration. My own reaction shocked me. If I don't control myself, I might end up becoming as monstrous as Mila. Why are you suddenly shouting? You're scaring me, Mila said, her tone only fueling my anger further. The one who's lost their mind is you, I retorted. I felt utterly pathetic, but I had no intention of going back to the company. It was time to express my true feelings. I was no longer under Mila's control, and I no longer cared about being disliked. Why are you yelling again? Mila's condescension only strengthened my resolve. I will never return to the company, no matter what you say. Why not? I'm saying it's okay for you to come back, she replied, still with that patronizing tone. It's because you're there. Besides, the company doesn't need me anymore. I'm offering you a chance to come back, and you're angry with me. Mila remained clueless about her own shortcomings. You judged employees solely on their educational background and disrupted the company's harmony. I shot back. Mila looked defensive. I disrupted the company's harmony? She questioned, but I wasn't finished. Her actions were unforgivable. She had unilaterally fired employees who hadn't finished high school. Young people with bright futures she crushed without a second thought. I couldn't let that go. I thought you were fired because you understood programming. Mila tried to twist the narrative. Seriously, you're bringing that up again. I wasn't backing down. I'll even retract calling you just a middle school grad if you come back. But once spoken, words can't be taken back, and neither can the damage they cause. Have you finally understood how I felt? I asked, knowing full well the answer. There's no way I could understand that, she replied, showing no sign of remorse. It was time to deliver the final blow. I've already secured a job at a major corporation, I announced. Mila's face went pale at the mention of the company's name. When did you manage to get into such a big company? She stammered. I laughed heartily. Ever since you started harassing me, I've been visiting this corporation several times. They were eager to hire me after seeing my years of programming experience. I'll be starting there after I leave this company, and they're even willing to wait for me. It's one of the top programming firms in Japan, and I'm confident it'll be a major step forward for my career. I've secured my future, so I have no more business here, I said coldly. Mila's face twisted in disbelief. How can someone like you, a middle school grad, get a job at such a big company? She demanded, her voice laced with anger. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, I thought we'd moved past the whole middle school grad thing. Clearly you're still stuck in that narrow mindset. Incompetent, she echoed, stunned. I nodded firmly. Exactly. You don't bother to understand your employees, which makes you a thoroughly incompetent department head. You're dragging the company down. and I've never seen anyone so unqualified for the role. You're the first and hopefully the last. Mila muttered, incompetent. Anyway, I said with finality, I will never return. I turned and walked out of the company. I was eager to escape the toxic environment and Mila's relentless incompetence. Later, I learned that Mila was left to manage all the programming alone. Without a proper grasp of it, the company's management quickly declined. The employees, frustrated with her performance, placed the blame squarely on her shoulders. Her pride prevented her from apologizing or seeking help, leading to her resignation. Given her actions, I felt no sympathy for her downfall. Now, having secured a position at a new company, I'm thriving. The environment is supportive, the colleagues are kind, and the team is full of talented individuals. I'm confident that joining this company was the right decision, and I'm excited to continue